She thought her father died in a truck accident. She was wrong. He died in a hail of bullets, protecting one of the most dangerous men in Los Angeles. And now, years later, that same man walks into his restaurant, sees her crying, and realizes exactly who she is. But before he can save her, he uncovers something even darker. She didn't end up there by accident. She was planted, watched, and marked for revenge.
Eels. Gabriel Mercer returned to his empire after a night of bloodshed, met by the jagged sound of a woman's grief. At 36, the architect of the Los Angeles criminal landscape bore the literal stains of a brutal exchange on his sleeves. Eels. This was his kingdom. Tonight he walked into Obsidian solo, shedding his security like a second skin in a ritual of deep-seated distrust. Mercer didn't care for ledgers. He sought the visceral, unvarnished pulse of the establishment. Eels. Convinced the true narrative lived under the polished corporate surface. He was hunting for the scars that the darkness worked so hard to conceal. Eels. Authenticity resides in the exhausted gazes of the kitchen staff and the muted murmurs of those who serve. Obsidian, a premier downtown venue, Eels, functioned as more than a culinary destination. It was an engine for cleaning money and bartering classified intelligence. For the powerful, it was a sanctuary of opulence. For Mercer, it was a dynamic blueprint. This Friday, Eels, the atmosphere was a meticulously designed fabrication. The aroma of seared meat and the slow pulse of jazz mimicked normalcy. To the casual observer, the illusion held. Yet, Eels, the flickering candles and gentle amusement merely masked a deep-seated terror. Mercer observed this theater with the detached precision of a forensic expert. Eels. Mercer possessed the clarity to dismantle the facade. Scanning the room, his eyes landed on Derek Lawson, the general manager. Lawson held himself with the hollow pride of a monarch, watching over the floor with a heavy, oppressive stillness. Eels. He wasn't overseeing operations, he was stalking prey. His stare betrayed a frantic hunger for control and intimidation. Mercer registered this toxic shift in authority with a silent shudder. Suddenly a noise pierced the air. A sharp, Eels, ragged cry echoing from the service corridor. It was a mechanical, fractured sound. It was the resonance of a human soul finally shattering under the pressure of an indifferent universe. Eels. The weeping wasn't a performance. It was the audible disintegration of a person struggling to remain whole. Mercer entered the staff lounge to find a woman in her late 20s, her frame bent as she clung to a table for balance. Eels. Her respiration was shallow and frantic, her fingers vibrating with the chemical shock of extreme stress. A colleague stood close by, speaking in hushed tones, attempting to mend the shards of her fractured composure. Eels. Mercer recognized the reality instantly. She had reached her breaking point, a vulnerable soul maintaining a professional veneer while her entire world crumbled into ash. Eels. This woman existed within a prison of constant anxiety. As she raised her gaze, Mercer felt a shock of familiarity that struck with the force of a physical impact. Eels. Her eyes were a piercing jade green, the precise hue of a man who had bled out in his arms 8 years ago. His pulse quickened as he struggled to rationalize the sight. He dismissed it as a coincidence, a distortion of the shadows. Eels. But his instincts shouted the truth. Those eyes were a specter from an evening of flame and carnage, a haunting file that had never been closed. He retreated, the weight of history pressing against his ribs like heavy lead. Eels. Decades of conflict had instructed him that chance is merely a fiction the brain invents for comfort. Mercer glided toward the bar, his expression a stoic shield as he initiated his surveillance. He required her identity. Eels. If this psychological mystery resonates with you, consider supporting this channel by liking and sharing. Subscribe for further investigations into this dark case file and enable notifications. Eels. Mercer watched the woman's associate return to the dining area, his posture unsteady and unnatural. An apex predator was stalking the floor, and the atmosphere felt heavy with it. Eels. Mercer would not depart until he extracted the reality from the gloom. Eels. The server Ryan Torres was agitated, his vision perpetually flickering toward the hallway, a transparent signal of panic. Mercer approached, requesting a pen simply to fracture the silence and gauge the man's state. He observed Torres flinch, Eels, his nervous system clearly overloaded and fragile. Mercer remained in his orbit, projecting a heavy, lethal gravity. At the mention of the weeping woman, Torres paralyzed, gripped by an ancient primal dread. Eels. He appeared trapped between two leviathans, uncertain of which would deliver the killing blow. Mercer monitored his erratic breathing, fully aware of the precise tension needed to dismantle a man of such weak constitution. Eels. Torres blinked rapidly, unable to maintain a steady gaze while offering a feeble lie that failed to convince. For a predator like Mercer, the dishonesty was transparent, rooted in a profound fear of the coming storm. Eels. Mercer wielded the quiet like a razor, waiting for the young man to collapse under the weight of his own anxiety. Eventually, Fia surrendered. He revealed her name was Grace, a worker who exhausted herself without ever voicing a grievance. Eels. She had been employed there for over a year, concealing her agony behind a flawless grin. She was the ideal target for Lawson, resilient enough to withstand abuse, yet too vulnerable to resist. Eels. Grace was imprisoned by the sheer gravity of her survival. Following her mother's death, she inherited $127,000 in debt, a heavy shackle that forced her to work until exhaustion. Eels. Lawson utilized that financial burden as a tether. He manipulated her earnings and sabotaged her hours, fully aware she lacked the means to escape. It was a classic example of a workplace tyrant weaponizing an individual's basic survival instinct. Eels. Torres spoke with a sharp bitterness, the tone of a person disgusted by his own cowardice. The psychological strain had become overwhelming, and Grace's composure was finally beginning to disintegrate. Eels. Unraveling this employment would be a final judgment, casting her back into the freezing abyss of destitution. Mercer pressed for further details, but Torres went white, his instincts urging him to flee. He sensed the approaching shadow. The manager, Eels. Derek Lawson. Mercer felt the atmospheric pressure shift as a venomous stare fixed on his shoulders. Torres scurried off, clumsily handling linens like a terrified creature. He terminated the exchange and vanished. Eels. His eyes dilated with the frantic terror of a hare sensing a hound. He was a ruined individual in a reality Lawson had engineered to destroy anything resembling compassion. Eels. Mercer remained unmoved, Lawson's presence without offering a single gesture of submission. He retreated into the dim periphery of the bar, scanning the environment with a clinical, detached focus. There, he made contact with Jake Morrison, Eels, a 32-year-old informant who had served as his internal surveillance for 2 years. Morrison was far more than a simple mixologist. He was a high-level asset filtering the underworld's secrets directly to Mercer, Eels. This alliance was the foundation of Mercer's power. Morrison buffed a glass with steady hands, his lethal identity submerged beneath the role of a humble employee. Mercer waited for the intelligence to flow, Eels. Morrison maintained his facade of service, performing the duties of a host as the tension between them thickened. To the public, it appeared as idle chatter, yet he was identifying Lawson as a critical error in the machine. Eels. Mercer signaled for a comprehensive debrief while projecting an image of total indifference. Morrison remained active, masking the transmission of sensitive data regarding the manager's latest activities. The objective was defined, Eels. Locate Lawson's vulnerability. Whiskey neat, Mercer requested, the verbal key to initiate the report. Morrison leaned inward, his voice a quiet, coarse murmur laden with forbidden truths. Eels. Lawson conducts clandestine meetings in the darkness after closing, utilizing the service alley to erase his trail. Morrison identified a cycle of covert encounters every 2 weeks with individuals who bypass the main entrance. Eels. These visitors do not carry themselves like ordinary citizens. They possess the jagged, vigilant eyes of professional outlaws. They lack the relaxed gait of the innocent, moving instead with the high-strung caution of those living on the fringe. Eels. A parallel economy is thriving directly beneath the establishment's polished surface. Morrison has yet to witness the cargo, but the indicators suggest a major operation. Lawson is dancing on the edge of a volcano. Eels. Mercer processed the intelligence with a dark, intuitive accuracy. The most disturbing revelation was Lawson's fixated interest in a server named Grace. This preoccupation wasn't driven by lust or management. It was clinical. Eels. He was unearthing her lineage, searching for her father's identity, his profession, and the precise circumstances of his passing. This transcended basic workplace bullying. It was a profound psychological autopsy. As Mercer absorbed these facts, Eels, his internal world grew colder. The past had ceased to be a static memory and had transformed into a dangerous, breathing entity. This manager wasn't merely overseeing a kitchen. He was a collector of hauntings, Eels, a harvester of deadly truths who had finally secured a trophy of immense value. Eels. Gabriel's intuition, honed by years of covert conflict, recognized a lethal irregularity. Lawson failed to match the archetype of a mundane manager. He behaved like a sophisticated operator, a puppet responding to a superior authority. Heels. Grace wasn't merely a worker. She was a calculated objective. Adopting a tactical mindset, Gabriel settled his tab and instructed Jake to monitor Derek's every movement. The air grew dense as the manager closed the distance. Heels. He advanced with a rhythmic, predatory stride. His features were a triumph of artifice, displaying the courteous, vacant grin of a predator. Yet his gaze remained stagnant. Heels, radiating a sterile chill more suited to a cold storage facility than a high-end eatery. Heels. At 44, Lawson stood as a lean and meticulous figure, a testament to unyielding structure. To a seasoned observer, this flawlessness served as armor, the characteristic facade of a narcissist. His speech was formal. Heels, yet it carried an undercurrent of suppressed hostility. He probed into Gabriel's extended visit, cloaking a tactical inquiry as routine customer service. Gabriel matched the antagonist's tempo, assuming the identity of an innocuous, Heels, affluent guest. He provided a hollow praise of the interior design, a strategic feint intended to neutralize the threat. However, as the manager demanded reasons for Gabriel's solitary dining, the dialogue evolved. Heels. The pretense of service dissolved into a precise interrogation of intent. Heels. Gabriel maintained a rigid poker face, utilizing a sincere remark about the Wagyu beef to ground his deception. It was a sliver of reality used to construct a mental stronghold. Lawson, however, remained skeptical. His vision sharpened. Heels, searching Gabriel's face for a recognizable signature from his past. He asserted they had crossed paths previously, the most ancient tactic in the interrogator's arsenal. The room felt increasingly claustrophobic, saturated with silent warnings. Heels. The evening had transitioned from hospitality into a grim evaluation. Lawson was searching for a structural flaw in the defense, his vocabulary saturated with the suspicion of a man who views every newcomer as a lurking assassin. Heels. Recognition would mean ruin. Yet Gabriel remained an iceberg, breathe steady, pulse indifferent, the cold rhythm of a natural predator. He held the manager's gaze with a void-like stare. Heels, offering a convenient exit by suggesting his face was merely familiar. Lawson paused, scanning for a flicker of deception, a single pearl of sweat. Seeing nothing but glass, he offered a smile that died at the lips, a rehearsed, hollow twitch. Heels. This silent duel revealed the stakes. Lawson was no mere bureaucrat. He was a high-functioning hunter masking his lethality beneath the mundane. In this social theater, two monsters had just sized each other up from across the divide. Heels. Lawson pulled back, though his eyes remained tethered to his mark. He traded in the currency of polite banalities, yet his focus pivoted as he navigated the room. He cast a sharp, jagged glance toward Grace. To the trained observer, Heels, this was the hungry look of a possessive narcissist. It lacked the professional distance of a manager. It was the chilling oversight of a warden. Grace's response spoke volumes of her internal collapse. She recoiled. Heels, her spirit seemingly flattened under his weight. She lived as a casualty of unseen warfare, trapped in a feedback loop of fear with no exit in sight. Heels. Grace's body betrayed her, shaking hands and tension that radiated from her spine. These are the etchings of prolonged trauma, and Lawson was the hand that held the needle. Her shift wasn't labor, it was a survival tactic. Heels. Gabriel observed as Lawson murmured to a subordinate, establishing a perimeter of eyes. This triangulation is the tactical playbook for high-stakes paranoia. Lawson's suspicion had transformed into a blade. Heels. He sought to peel back Gabriel's mask and neutralize the threat. Despite the gathering storm, Gabriel remained motionless, nursing his whiskey while concealing his awareness of the snare. Heels. This cold dance of hunter and hunted had graduated to a lethal degree. Heels. The blueprint of Lawson's character was becoming clear. He functioned as a mid-tier operator for a larger machine, trafficking in secrets and broken lives. His fixation on Grace's lineage fueled his particular brand of malice. In his eyes, Heels, Gabriel was now a wolf encroaching on his territory. Gabriel exited the establishment, seeking the sanctuary of the night air. The desolation of the parking lot provided a canvas for his thoughts. Heels. He needed to decipher why her emerald gaze was reopening scars he thought long healed. Grace had transcended the status of a simple project. For Gabriel, her salvation was no longer optional. It was an act of personal redemption. Heels. From the safety of the shadows, Gabriel watched Grace through the glass. Her posture was a portrait of defeat, her hair falling like a veil over her features. Suddenly, a beam of light caught her eyes, vivid jade with sparks of gold. Heels. The recognition was violent, a visceral shock that pulled him 8 years into the past. The blackest chapter of his history surged forward, erasing the world around him. Back then, at 28, Gabriel was the heir to a sprawling underworld throne. Heels. He was oblivious to the fact that his reality was about to be incinerated by a singular, savage betrayal that would redefine the rest of his life. Heels. Picture an armored shell carrying Gabriel and his father, Robert Mercer. Robert was the undisputed sovereign of the Los Angeles crime world, and behind the wheel sat Thomas Sullivan. Thomas was a pillar of absolute devotion. Heels. A guardian with those unforgettable green eyes who had stood by them for 2 decades. To Gabriel, he wasn't just a bodyguard. He was a mentor and a father in spirit, yet their fortress was a fragile illusion. Heels. As the vehicle moved through a deserted stretch, the piece exploded. Searing white flashes and the rhythmic roar of machine gun fire signaled the start of a slaughter that would leave a permanent scar on the survivors. Heels. The barrage was unceasing, shredding the steel plating as if it were parchment. Robert Mercer vanished in an instant, his life extinguished by a hail of lead. Gabriel scrambled to act, but Thomas Sullivan forced him to the floor. Heels. Thomas transformed into a living shield, taking hit after hit while returning fire with a detached surgical focus. Even with his body failing, he anchored himself against the storm. He stood as a barricade of sheer will. Heels. Guarding the Mercer name until he had nothing left to give. When he finally fell, he was a shell of a man, his lifeblood seeping into Gabriel's jacket as the chaos faded into a terrible silence. Heels. The assassins disappeared into the dark, leaving a theater of ruin in their wake. Gabriel, the sole survivor of the wreck, cradled his dying protector. Thomas's green eyes were dimming, the vibrant life receding as he choked on his own words. Heels. He managed one final command, live. Then, with his fading strength, he breathed a single name, Grace. It was a dying wish for his daughter, his only true light in a world of shadows. With that, Thomas Sullivan slipped away. Heels. He left Gabriel with a debt that transcended any ledger, a silent, crushing vow to a girl whose face he had never seen. Heels. Gabriel seized the crown and systematically purged the traitors. He attempted to track down Thomas's child, but her trail had been scrubbed clean. Over time, the demands of his kingdom smothered the flame of his promise. Heels. Pain has a way of obscuring duty, but seeing Grace now, the truth was unmistakable. Her features and that piercing green gaze were a perfect biological reflection of the man who gave his life for Gabriel. Heels. The revelation struck him with the weight of a mountain. The spirit of Thomas Sullivan had returned, standing before him in the flesh. Heels. Gabriel contacted his closest associate, Marcus Webb. His tone was frostbitten, laced with a murderous clarity. He ordered a complete obsidian dossier on Grace. He required every detail, her residence, her family, her entire timeline. Heels. If she was indeed Sullivan's blood, Gabriel had committed a grave sin of omission for 8 years. While he sat on his throne, the daughter of his savior had been abandoned to predators like Lawson. Heels. The debt of a decade's neglect had finally come calling. This deep dive into her existence was merely the opening move. He was prepared to burn the world to the ground to ensure her safety. Heels. Gabriel remains in the Bentley, a silent specter merged with the darkness. His stare acts as a searchlight, piercing the windows of the Obsidian restaurant. Inside that glass cage, Grace Sullivan navigates her shift. Heels. A gentle creature oblivious to the predator, Derek Lawson, lurking nearby. Her reality is on the cusp of an explosion she cannot foresee. Gabriel glances at his watch. 20 minutes have passed since Marcus reached out. Time begins to pull tight. Heels. Agonizingly thin. His heart hammers an erratic, desperate beat against his chest, a rare crack in his frozen exterior. If she truly carries Thomas Sullivan's DNA, his failure is a staggering weight. Heels. He has neglected the only living piece of the man who traded his life for Gabriel's own. This shame acts as a corrosive, eating away at the cold discipline he cultivated over a lifetime. Heels. For 8 years, she has endured in a void, a phantom Gabriel failed to recognize. His phone buzzes. Marcus. The text on the display is clinical, a cold herald of the emotional wreckage to follow. Gabriel's grip tightens until his fingers go pale. Heels. Marcus provides the confirmation. Grace Sullivan, age 27, the daughter of Thomas. Gabriel's pulse falters, a jagged break in his composure. His instincts had already whispered the truth, but seeing the name written out is a visceral blow. Heels. Marcus hesitates, the quiet on the line burdened by the sorrow of the narrative he is about to share. The roadmap of her suffering is now illuminated. She stands as a living reminder of a sacred obligation he left unfulfilled. Feels. Following Thomas's death, Linda Sullivan pushed through years of grueling work, determined to fund Grace's future. Yet the hardship intensified 6 years ago with a terminal diagnosis. 10 months of suffering left Grace alone. Feels. Haunted by her mother's memory and buried under a medical debt of $127,000. To someone with Gabriel's resources, the sum is trivial. To a solitary girl, it is a wall that obscures the horizon. Feels. It pressured her to abandon her 3rd year of college, a future cut short by a lack of funds. Since that moment, she has been captive to low-wage labor, a casualty of a world that offers no lifelines to those who are sinking. Feels. She is a prisoner of circumstance, paying for a survival she never asked for. Feels. Her existence dissolved into a cycle of service jobs and manual labor. She entered the snare of the obsidian 14 months ago. 8 years, Gabriel murmurs, the weight of the words pulling at him. He has allowed her to suffer for nearly a decade. Feels. Isolated and vulnerable, the ghost of Thomas Sullivan's last breath returns, the frantic, broken request of a dying man. He can still visualize those green eyes, vacant yet piercing, a quiet indictment of a promise ignored. Feels. Marcus interrupts the silence with a single name, Derek Lawson. The air in the car sharpens instantly. Gabriel's internal hunter wakes up. Marcus explains that Lawson is far more than a simple manager. Feels. He is a jagged fragment of a far more dangerous conspiracy presently moving in the dark. Feels. Lawson is merely a projection of Victor Crane. That name strikes Gabriel with the force of a bullet. He goes rigid, his frame locking into an icy stillness as he nearly snaps the wheel. He demands an explanation of how Crane survived. Feels. Convinced his entire organization was decimated 8 years ago. Marcus updates the record. Crane didn't perish, he simply retreated, spending the last decade reconstructing his power in the shadows. Feels. Derek Lawson serves as his main instrument of terror. An old, frigid fury surges through Gabriel. Victor Crane is the specter of his past, the master designer of the slaughter that claimed both his father and Thomas Sullivan. Feels. The objective has shifted. This pursuit is no longer a haunting memory. It has officially restarted with a new lethal urgency. Feels. Marcus breaks down the link between the manager and the girl. Gabriel remains in the quiet, digesting the horror. Victor Crane is fully aware of Grace's identity. Feels. Her employment at the Obsidian was no coincidence. It was a cage built by a man who plays with souls for sport. Gabriel's jaw tightens into a mask of absolute, concentrated hatred. This is a grand design of generational vengeance. Feels. Thomas Sullivan once acted as a barrier to Crane's ambition, and now his daughter is being forced to pay the price. Grace is a substitute, a casualty suffering for a history she has no knowledge of. Feels. Marcus describes Lawson as a handler, a mental gardener sowing seeds of dread to maintain his grip. She is a captive in a cell constructed from her own forgotten past. Feels. Lawson's questions about Thomas were merely the predator circling his prey. Victor Crane has drafted a dark script for Grace, an ending still obscured by the cold fog of the underworld. Gabriel views the board from a higher plane. Feels. Recognizing Grace as a mere pawn in a sociopath's game, a child caught in a cycle of violence that predates her own birth. When Marcus inquires about the next move, Gabriel's response is a sharpened blade. Feels. He commands the surgical removal of Derek Lawson. No blood, no footprint, no mercy. His gaze shifts toward the true objective, Victor Crane. From the shadows, he watches Grace work her shift. Feels. Standing unknowingly in a killing field as a storm of fire gathers around her. Feels. Gabriel determines that Crane's time in the shadows has reached its expiration. He re-enters the Obsidian with a singular burning intent to locate Grace and unveil the truth. Amidst the roar of the crowd and the rhythmic clatter of plates, Feels. He maintains a narrow focus. He is hunting for those familiar green eyes. When the dining floor yields nothing, he slips into the back, entering the sterile light of the staff quarters. He freezes upon hearing Lawson's voice, a low, icy threat. Feels. The manager is cornering her, demanding overtime with a tone thick with intimidation. This is the moment the predator asserts dominance over the vulnerable. Gabriel stands in the darkness, dissecting every cruel syllable Lawson utters. Feels. Grace's voice is a fragile, splintering thing. She attempts to resist, to push back against the weight of his demands. Lawson counters with the cold reality of her existence, her debts, her isolation, and her absolute lack of agency. Feels. It is a masterclass in cruelty, a predator utilizing a girl's poverty as a leash to ensure her submission. He threatens her with the street, stripping away her final shred of dignity and safety. When the lecture concludes, Lawson walks away, his face a mask of sociopathic boredom. Gabriel remains hidden, feeling a primal violent urge to dismantle the man right there. Yet he restrains himself. He has a larger game to play. For now, Lawson is simply a corpse that has not yet stopped walking. Once Lawson departs, Gabriel emerges from the gloom. Grace looks ready to shatter, her hands tracing desperate circles as she struggles for composure. She is breathing in shallow bursts, her eyes red and parched. She has lived in a state of high tension for so long that tears have forgotten how to fall. She is a well that has finally run dry. Gabriel speaks with a voice that is intentionally soft, careful not to startle her. She flinches anyway, her body recoiling before she attempts to don her professional mask. It is a tragic display of the discipline of the broken. She tells him he is trespassing, but Gabriel steps closer, watching the walls she built begin to crumble. Gabriel informs her that he is no longer a customer. Grace remains on high alert, her eyes darting like a bird in a snare. When he looks into them, he sees the exact green of Thomas Sullivan. A phantom hand tightens around his throat. He speaks her father's name. Grace freezes, her features hardening into stone. The words steal the very air from her lungs. She stumbles back, pressing against the cold wall for support. In a voice that is barely a whisper, she asks if he knew him. Gabriel nods, confirming he spent 20 years with the man at the center of her world's grief. Gabriel explains that Thomas served his family for 2 decades. The revelation hits her like a physical blow, clashing with the lies she has lived for years. She clings to the story of a worker killed in an accident. Gabriel shakes his head, severing the fantasy. Thomas Sullivan was an elite protection officer, a man of violence and loyalty, not a laborer, and he did not die by chance. Grace's worldview collapses in a heartbeat. She stares at him with the blank eyes of the traumatized. He leans in and begins the chronicle of 8 years ago, the ambush. His voice drops, heavy with the blood and fire of that night. Gabriel recounts the treachery, the sudden thunder of the attack. His father fell instantly, a victim of the opening volley. Gabriel survived only because Thomas Sullivan stepped into the line of fire. Thomas became a human shield, absorbing every bullet intended for another. He held his ground, returning fire until his body simply failed. A heavy silence descends upon Grace as she processes the truth. There are no screams, only a shattering internal grief. Gabriel remembers the final moments. Thomas dying in his arms. The last word on the man's lips was her name. A broken promise, a debt now etched into Gabriel's soul. Thomas died, leaving a debt to his daughter, the girl who was his entire world. Grace breaks, leaning against the cold wall to keep from collapsing. 8 years. She whispers the number like a curse. Her father's memory was a lie. She asks why her mother buried the truth so deeply. Gabriel explains it was a shield. The shadow is no place for a civilian. Her mother built a wall of secrets to keep the darkness away. It was a desperate, suffocating act of love. Grief tears through Grace, transforming her father from a ghost into a fallen martyr. Gabriel watches the cracks form in her soul, seeing the void left by nearly a decade of lies. He steps in as her new anchor, her new protector. His vow is quiet, possessive, and absolute. He claims her safety as his own. The air shifts as Derek Lawson strides into the hall. Grace flinches instinctively, falling back into a state of total submission. Her body reacts before her mind can even process his barked orders. In an instant, she is no longer a woman, but a broken spirit answering the call of a predator. She is a victim performing a role she learned far too well. A year of constant fear had wired her for retreat, but Gabriel blocks the exit. He stands like a wall, cold and unmoving. Derek tries to puff his chest, playing the big man with a threatening glare. He has no idea he is facing a man who breathes violence and lives for control. He is a child playing at power in the shadow of a god. Derek is used to being the biggest dog in the room, but Gabriel's eyes scan him like a wolf deciding where to bite. He isn't just a businessman. He is the man who owns the world. When the name Mercer is spoken, the air leaves the room. Derek's ego shatters instantly. Arrogance turns to a cold, paralyzing terror that roots him to the spot. In the underworld of Los Angeles, Mercer is a name that demands total silence. Derek's bravado evaporates under Gabriel's heavy stare. The kingpin begins to list Derek's sins, the abuse, the cruelty, the petty tyranny. Derek can't even find the words to lie. His face turns ash white as his secrets are dragged into the light. He is a dead man standing. Heals. Gabriel moves in closer, pinning Derek against the reality of his own ruin. He reveals every secret text, every hidden call, shattering the man's illusion of privacy. Grace watches, her world tilting on its axis. Her mysterious customer isn't just a hero. He is the master of everything. He is the invisible hand that controls the floor beneath her feet. Heals. Gabriel turns back to Grace, softly explaining that her tormentor no longer matters. A flicker of hope shines in her eyes, a dangerous bond forming with a new, stronger master. Beside them, Derek is a ghost of a man. He trembles, his power stripped away until there is nothing left. In this world of wolves, he has finally realized he is nothing but sheep. Heals. The sentence is handed down with a chilling, flat voice. Derek's touched something that belonged to Gabriel, a sin that requires a brutal price. It is a final, terminal command. As Derek slinks away like a beaten dog, Gabriel pulls Grace closer. Her loneliness is gone, replaced by the heavy, suffocating weight of his shadow. For the first time, she feels safe and utterly owned. Heals. The door clicks shut like a tomb. Derek is a mess, shoulders hunched, hands twisting, a fake smile plastered on his face. He tries to explain away his cruelty, calling it business, but Gabriel cuts him off with a look. The game is over. The predator is finished playing with his food. There are no more excuses left, only the cold silence of the end. Heals. Gabriel looms over him, waiting for the final crack to appear. He drops a name like a bomb, Victor Crane. The effect is instant and devastating. Derek's face goes ghost white as he realizes his double cross is out in the open. Gabriel's words hit like lead weights, one after another, crushing what little remains of the manager's spirit until he is absolutely broken. Heals. Gabriel lays out the evidence with surgical detail. Every secret meeting and midnight call was watched. He demands one thing, Victor Crane's location. It is a simple choice. Tell the truth or die. Derek tries to lie, a weak and desperate reflex. But Gabriel moves into his space, looming like a mountain. The manager collapses into a state of pure, shaking terror and starts to talk. Heals. The man finally snaps. He gives up the address, a rotting warehouse on the edge of the city. Gabriel listens without emotion as the full truth spills out. Victor Crane has been stalking him for 3 years, a sick obsession fueled by hate. Now that darkness is coming to a head in the ruins of the industrial zone, waiting for its final act. Heals. Victor Crane is a monster who craves a symphony of pain. He does not just want Gabriel dead, he wants his soul destroyed. His plan is a tragedy of revenge, using Grace as the tool to tear Gabriel apart. The air in the room grows heavy as the truth sinks in. This is a descent into the darkest parts of humanity. Heals. Gabriel is a storm of suppressed fury. He treats Derek Lawson as mere surgical waste, a rot that must be excised from his syndicate. His voice is a low, lethal vibration, already charting the next move. The man had 15 minutes to become a ghost, fading into the night. Gabriel never looks back. His focus has already shifted toward the blood that necessity demands he spill. Heals. Clean. The word falls like a guillotine from a face carved in stone. While Derek remains paralyzed by the weight of his own fear, Gabriel looks without backward glance. For Grace, the following days dissolve into a hazy unreality. Trapped within a glass palace overlooking the city, she inhabits a world of opulent silence. She observes the distant lights like a specter, safe yet profoundly alienated from her own existence. Heals. Gabriel orchestrates his campaign with the chilling precision of a predator. Every strike commences a grand strategy of vengeance. Yet he returns to Grace for dinner, maintaining a fragile veneer of normalcy. They discuss her fractured dreams and the blood debt he owes her father. With each quiet conversation, he anchors himself to her soul. He is no longer just a guardian. He is becoming her entire horizon. Heals. From the shadows, he observes her quiet devotion to literature. Gabriel reads her spirit through the turning of pages. He gifts her the very volumes she once coveted, a gesture of profound psychological manipulation. Her pulse quickens and her fingers tremble as she accepts them. She mistakes this calculated move for genuine warmth, a spark long missing from her life. Yet it is a gilded trap, tethering her soul to his with every printed word. Heals. She whispers her gratitude, and for a fleeting second, the frost in Gabriel's gaze fractures. It is the expression of a man submerged in his own internal ruin. Later, driven by a nameless restlessness, Grace finds him on the balcony. Stripped of his tailored armor, he stands exposed. A constellation of silver scars marks his back, a brutal cartography of past violence. These are the physical receipts of a life forged in fire, shimmering under the moon's cold, clinical light. Heals. Grace draws near the wreckage of his flesh. When she inquires about his past, his voice turns ethereal, recounting the night her father, Thomas Selzenherveen. Thomas became a living shield, absorbing the lead intended for Gabriel. As she touches the scarred tissue, Gabriel tenses. Such tenderness is alien to a man defined by the bite of steel. This soft contact pierces his emotional fortress, unraveling the defenses he has spent a lifetime constructing against the world's cruelty. Feels. This is no longer mere obligation. It is a reflection of shared brokenness. 8 years of mourning her father's ghost culminate in this heavy, silent tether. A psychologist might label it a trauma bond or a symptom of Stockholm Syndrome, but the intimacy fractures when the radio crackles. Marcus brings word. The operation is scheduled for tomorrow. The strike on Victor Crane is confirmed. Abruptly, Goffbrew is reclaimed by his world of iron, abandoning the fragile warmth he found in Grace. Feels. Gabriel nods as the impending deadline settles over him like a shroud. A sharp premonition takes root, the instinctual warning that preserves a soldier's life. He senses an invisible threat looming over the woman he swore to protect. Later, analyzing satellite imagery with Marcus, they refine the warehouse assault. Victor Crane's refuge appears insignificant from orbit. 20 men divided into 3 units. A tightening circle of death designed to leave the enemy with no sanctuary and no escape. Feels. Logically, the strategy is impeccable. Secure the perimeters and leave 0 survivors. Yet, Gabriel is haunted by a primal unease, sensing a breach in his mental defenses. His intuition recognizes the scent of an impending ambush. Feels. He dismisses Marcus's concern, but the deception ends when the power fails. Absolute darkness consumes the space. Then the rhythmic roar of automatic gunfire erupts. The perimeter has been compromised. Feels. His sanctuary is being systematically dismantled from within, exposing the rot in his inner circle. Feels. Chaos ignites as the corridors transform into a killing floor. This is no accident. It is a calculated betrayal. The security protocols were not merely circumvented, they were incinerated. As his soldiers fall, Gabriel abandons his tactical persona. Feels. The stoic commander is replaced by a man consumed by fear for Grace. Get her to the safe room, he commands Marcus. Plunging into the inferno, he discards every principle of self-preservation, propelled by a desperate, Feels, primal urge to ensure her survival against all odds. Feels. Their defenses collapse instantly. Marcus is struck, and a violent impact sends Gabriel unconsciousness. He awakens pinned beneath a heavy boot, gasping for air. Then, he sees the face of his nightmare. Victor Crane has evolved into a mask of pure malice. His features are rigid, his eyes like abyssal ink, devoid of any human compassion. He is a predator who thrives on the suffering of others. Now looming over Gabriel with a smile that carries the chill of the graveyard. Feels. Victor savors his captive, his voice a toxic distillation of 8 years of resentment. He has survived for this moment to witness the end of the Mercer bloodline. Gabriel meets his gaze with eyes of flint, denying his tormentor the pleasure of fear. Feels. Victor's brittle laugh echoes through the wreckage, an anthem of cruel triumph. He has emerged from the darkness of history just to witness Gabriel Mercer's downfall. He raises his pistol, his finger tightening to conclude their long, Feels, blood-soaked narrative forever. Feels. With perverse pride, Victor admits to the initial assassination plot, born of his obsession with eradicating the Mercer legacy. However, he never anticipated Thomas Sullivan's interference. Feels. That singular act of sacrifice forced him into a decade of subterranean exile. Now his appetite for vengeance has expanded. Simply executing Gabriel is insufficient. He intends to shatter Thomas Sullivan's daughter, Feels, forcing her to atone for her father's nobility. It is the final act of a hollow man, desperate to extinguish any remaining light out of pure spite. Feels. Gabriel surges at the mention of Grace, but the restraints and guards prove insurmountable. Victor's laughter signals the beginning of a hunt through the darkened halls. In her quarters, Grace awakens to a living nightmare. Feels. Her heart beats a frantic rhythm as survival instinct guides her toward the safe room. She flees, her breath hitching in her throat as she seals herself inside. Within the bunker, the surveillance monitors flare to life, offering a clinical, Feels, electronic perspective of the carnage occurring just beyond the reinforced door. Feels. The displays reveal a tableau of absolute catastrophe. Gabriel is subdued, a weapon pressed against his temple by a specter from the shadows. Nearby, Marcus lies motionless in a spreading pool of crimson. Feels. The chamber is crowded with anonymous executioners, yet Victor remains the focal point, a predator whose face is a desert of mercy. Grace watches the transmission, her hands pressed against the cold screen, feels, realizing the terrifying fragility of her existence and the imminent deletion of the man who kept her safe. Feels. Victor's voice pierces the audio link like a razor. Thomas Sullivan perished for you, Gabriel. He absorbed the lead so you could continue your hollow life. His laughter is a jagged instrument of cruelty. Your savior is dead, feels, and no one is coming to rescue you. Grace recoils, striking the bunker's cold bulkhead. The revelation is more devastating than physical violence. Her father's death was no accident. He sacrificed himself for Gabriel. Now, feels, his executioner returns to finalize the debt. She can remain concealed or act, feels. Her sense of security was a fragile illusion. She could remain hidden and survive, but Gabriel's fate would be sealed. She feels an inexplicable gravity toward him, a connection forged in the debris of their shared history, feels. This man has been her sole confidant, offering a tenderness she hadn't experienced since her childhood. If he perishes, she will return to a void populated only by memories. Grace closes her eyes, envisioning her father's face, feels. She recalls his emerald eyes, the same ones reflected in her mirror, watching her with an eternal, boundless affection, feels. He traded his life for a stranger's. That was Thomas Sullivan's true legacy, not wealth, but the audacity of sacrifice. Grace opens her eyes, her tremors subsiding. She surveys the safe room. Gabriel promised it contained every necessity, feels. In a lower drawer, she discovers a heavy black firearm. She is ignorant of ballistics and recoil, her heart still hammering against her ribs. Yet she understands the mechanics of a trigger. In a landscape of monsters, a single, feels, decisive act of violence can rewrite the conclusion of a tragedy, feels. Grace grips the weapon, its metallic weight cold against her skin, and approaches the exit. She inhales deeply and ventures into the corridor. The hall is a corridor of shadows, vibrating with the distant sounds of the invaders, feels. She glides like a specter, her pulse echoing in her ears, yet she refuses to falter. Reaching the threshold, she hears Victor's final derisive inquiry. Any last words, Gabriel, before I reunite you with your father? Grace does not waver, feels. She emerges from the darkness, her weapon aimed at the monster's stop. Every eye fixes on her, the narrative shifts, feels. Inside that sterile, suffocating room, Marcus was fading while Gabriel witnessed a true psychological nightmare. Stop, Grace, please, he pleaded. Victor's face contorted, his brief surprise melting into the sadistic pleasure of a predator. Feels. Thomas Sullivan's girl, he whispered, tasting the irony. What a gift. I was coming for you anyway. Grace's hands trembled with rage, yet the barrel never wavered. Release him. Victor's laugh was empty, a hollow sound. And then, feels. You don't have the nerve, Grace offered no reply. She simply engaged the trigger. Feels. The thunder of the shot tore through the silence. The bullet missed Victor, burying itself in the shoulder of a lackey. In an instant, the world descended into violence. As his men pivoted, Victor found his window and aimed directly at Grace. Feels. He didn't hesitate. The lead struck her gut with sickening force, a crimson flower blooming on her shirt as her knees buckled. She fell. Grace. Gabriel's voice broke, a primal sound of absolute loss. Driven by despair, he ripped through his captors. Feels. Across the floor, Marcus snatched a weapon, taking down 2 guards as the momentum of this bloody cycle finally shifted. Feels. The penthouse became a grim charnel house. Grace lay dying, her gaze fixed on the ceiling as she spoke to her father's shadow. Was this justice? Gabriel's sanity fractured, giving way to the cold instincts of a hunter. Feels. A decade of underworld survival erupted into a terrifying, white, hot fury. He threw himself at Victor, fueled by 8 years of concentrated spite. The villain was too slow. Gabriel's fist connected with bone, Feels, sending the man reeling as his pistol slid across the tiles, discarded and inert. But Victor Crane was no novice. He wouldn't die without a final, desperate struggle. Feels. Victor hadn't endured this long by accident. He absorbed the impact and countered, his knuckles cracking against Gabriel's jaw. They clashed with a primal, animalistic heat. No weapons remained, only muscle, bone, and a deep, toxic animosity. Feels. Gabriel lunged with frantic strikes. Victor deflected, hitting back with calculated cruelty. They tumbled through the wreckage, painting the walls with their own gore. Behind them, Marcus remained locked in a lethal exchange of fire. Feels. The room heavy with the smell of cordite. But Gabriel was deaf to it all. He had entered a trance, a hollow space where only his enemy remained. Feels. The world outside narrowed to a point. You murdered my father, Gabriel roared, his fists hammering into Victor's skull. You took Thomas away. Another blow landed. You destroyed Grace. That final strike sent the broken man to the floorboards. Heels. Gabriel lunged, his hands tightening around Victor's neck. The man's frantic clawing was useless against such hatred. Gabriel's vision was stained red, his lungs burning for air. He was a second away from becoming the very monster he loathed. Then, heels. A faint sound pierced his madness. A soft, broken whisper. It was a voice that seemed to pull him back from the abyss. Heels. Was I right? Just like him? Grace. The realization broke Gabriel. She was right there, her life pouring out onto the cold floor. Those green eyes were glazed, conversing with a spirit. This was the true cycle of trauma. 8 years prior, Heels, he had held Thomas Sullivan, watching the light fade from those very same eyes. Thomas had died so his daughter could live. Now the past was devouring the present. Grace was drifting into the same darkness, Heels, asking the same heartbreaking questions about her own worth. The tragedy had finally come full circle, echoing through the years. Heels. Gabriel released his grip. Victor was irrelevant now, only she mattered. He rushed to Grace's side, cradling her head against him. Grace, look at me. Her eyelids flickered, searching until she saw him. She offered a weak, agonizing smile. Are you hurt? Heels, she whispered. Gabriel felt his chest tighten with grief. Even on the threshold of death, she thought only of him. I am okay. You're going to survive. Stay with me. He applied pressure to the wound, desperate to stem the flow. Heels. Her blood on his palms felt like his own soul leaking out onto the floor. Heels. Get help now, he shouted at Marcus. Get the paramedics. Marcus struggled with his phone, his fingers trembling with shock. Gabriel turned his focus back to Grace. Her gaze was distant, the spark fading. Would my father be proud? She asked. Heels. Her voice barely a breath. For the first time in a decade, Gabriel's stoic facade shattered. He would be so proud he wake. I need to say it every single day. Do you understand? She gave him one final, Heels, delicate smile before her eyes drifted shut. Grace. Panic surged, but her chest still moved, ever so slightly. Heels. Her breathing was faint, shallow, and rhythmic. She had finally succumbed to the blood loss. In the distance, the scream of sirens signaled that hope was near. Gabriel refused to move, his entire existence centered on the thrum of her pulse. Behind him, Heels. Marcus held Victor down, bound and broken. The villain's destiny was of no concern. There was only Grace, caught in that liminal space between existence and the void. You are going to be fine, Gabriel murmured, a quiet vow to the stars. I won't lose you. Heels, I won't fail you like I failed Thomas. Heels. The paramedics were there in 10 minutes. They moved with clinical precision, stabilizing Grace and moving her to the stretcher. Gabriel watched, his palms stained with her life. He felt himself fracturing inside. Heels. But there was one final task before he could leave. Victor lay in the wreckage, his body ruined by the struggle. He lived barely, his frame bent at unnatural angles. He groaned through the agony, Heels, yet his gaze remained venomous as Gabriel loomed over him. The dynamics had shifted. The survivor was finally the master of this long, bloody tragedy. Heels. Gabriel looked down at the architect of his suffering. Victor Crane, the man who slaughtered Gabriel's father and forced Thomas Sullivan to his end. Victor, shattered and bleeding, actually pleaded for the release of death. But Gabriel's gaze was frozen. Heels. For a creature like this, a quick exit was a mercy he had never earned. No, he deserved a long life defined by regret and isolation. He signaled Marcus to remove him. Heels. Marcus seized the broken man by his collar and hauled him into the shadows to meet a much slower fate. Heels. Victor's cries died away as Gabriel stepped out of the wreckage. His mind was fixed solely on the ambulance racing toward the hospital. He drove with a desperate intensity, praying for her survival. At the emergency room, they swept her into surgery, Heels, the doors sealing him out. Gabriel watched through the pain as the surgeons crowded around her small form. When the curtains finally closed, he collapsed into a plastic chair. His endurance was spent. The man of ice had vanished, Heels, replaced by a soul completely shattered by the weight of the night's events. Heels. Her blood dried on his skin, dark lines he refused to wash away. He sat in a hollow trance for 4 long. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Each time those doors opened, his pulse with dread. In his despair, Gabriel did something he hadn't tried since childhood. He prayed. In that sterile hallway, thick with the scent of antiseptic and cold steel, he begged a silent universe to save the girl with the green eyes. He bartered for her life while the indifferent world continued to turn. Heels. He prayed for Grace, the final legacy of the man who died for him. She had mirrored her father's ultimate sacrifice, placing herself in the line of fire. After 4 agonizing hours, the surgeon emerged. Gabriel was standing instantly. Heals. The doctor explained the bullet had narrowly missed her liver, though the blood loss was severe. The prognosis, she was resilient. She would survive the night. Gabriel finally released the breath he had been clutching in his chest. Heals. A heavy weight lifting from his soul at the news of her survival. Heals. The wave of relief was overwhelming. Grace was going to endure. He followed the nurse to her bed, where she lay motionless. She seemed so fragile and pale, tethered to machines that breathed on her behalf. Heals. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor was the sweetest melody he had ever known. Gabriel sat beside her, gently taking her hand. She was alive, though lost in a deep, medicated slumber. He remained there, a silent observer of her breathing. Heals. A witness to her incredible defiance against the dark hand of fate. Heals. Her hand was like cold stone, yet the faint rhythm beneath her skin was a lifeline. Gabriel leaned in, whispering into the silence that he would never leave her side. For 48 hours he remained a statue. Heals. Disregarding hunger and the weight of exhaustion. He was a specter in the ward, his gaze locked on the heart monitor's green pulse as if his own life was tied to that line. When the staff tried to intervene, his sharp look turned them away. Heals. He was a guardian now, tethered by an absolute and unwavering vigilance. Heals. Gabriel stayed rooted. Marcus brought updates on Victor Crane's exile into a facility designed for total psychological decay. The villain's end was sealed, but Gabriel's reality was confined to this single hospital bed. On the 3rd day, Heals. The morning sun pierced the ward's gloom, and Grace finally moved. Her emerald eyes flickered, adjusting to the light before locking onto Gabriel's face. He was right there, his focus so sharp it felt like a physical weight. Heals. A man waiting for a miracle. He had been holding his breath for this exact moment of resurrection. Heals. Gabriel appeared as a hollowed-out monument to his former self. Days of neglect left him with a jagged beard and bruised, sunken pits beneath his eyes. Heals. The kingpin of the Los Angeles underworld looked as if he had just crawled from the carnage of a heavy wreck. Grace struggled to find her voice through a throat that felt like dry earth and rusted iron. She finally managed a rasping whisper. Heals. Shattering the heavy silence by telling him he looked like absolute hell. A ragged breath escaped Gabriel, the crushing pressure finally lifting from his chest as he realized she was truly there with him. Heals. He whispered her name once more, anchoring his reality to the fact that she was still breathing. Slowly, the fractured glass of memory returned to Grace, the screams echoing in the safe room and the blinding flash of a muzzle. Heals. Fear flickered in her eyes as she asked about Victor. Gabriel's expression went cold, a dark shadow crossing his brow as he confirmed that the threat was extinguished forever. Victor was gone. Grace felt a massive weight drop from her heart. Heals. But the peace was fleeting. One question still haunted her, a question for the man whose dark shadow she had just stepped into. Heals. She asked him if her father would have been proud of her. Gabriel's eyes softened, offering a rare glimpse of the man beneath the predator's mask. He told her Thomas Sullivan would have likely yelled at her for being so reckless. Heals. Her father would have hated seeing his daughter standing in front of a killer's barrel. But then, Gabriel's voice dropped to a low, heavy tremor. He told her Thomas would be immensely proud. Heals. Grace had echoed her father's ultimate sacrifice from 8 years ago, shielding another life with her own body. Gabriel's words trailed off, his throat tightening as the memory of his old friend surged back. Heals. Grace saw the depth of his gratitude in the hard set of his jaw. She reached out, her fingers trembling until they finally found his. Gabriel gripped her hand with a desperate, crushing strength. Heals. Holding on as if she might simply dissolve into the hospital air. She whispered her thanks for the truth and for keeping her safe through the storm. Gabriel did not say a word. His iron grip was the only promise he needed to make. Heals. In the amber glow of the morning, their silence spoke louder than any medical report. Something had shifted forever, a new connection forged in the heat of blood and fire. Heals. A dark, invisible thread now bound them together, a tether woven from shared scars and spilled blood. As the days passed, Grace slowly regained her vitality, but Gabriel was the one who underwent a true metamorphosis. He never left her side. Heals. He slept in a hard, plastic chair and shared the same tasteless meals she did. When she grew tired, he read to her his hands once instruments of violence, now gentle as he tended to her. The feared kingpin had shed his cold skin. Heals. replaced by a man consumed by a fierce protective devotion to the girl who had nearly died for him. Heals. When the doctors finally gave the word, Gabriel was the one who helped her take those first shaky steps. The man who ruled the city was now her literal crutch, a fascinating reversal of power. One evening, as the shadows grew long across the floor, he finally spoke about the weight of what had happened. He told her she had saved him in the exact same way her father did 8 years ago. His voice was heavy, each word carrying the weight of a decade's worth of guilt. He admitted that he was now in her debt, owing her his life just as he once owed Thomas Sullivan. Grace shook her head, a small smile touching her lips at the mention of a debt. She told him she did not want a transaction for what she had done. She had protected him because he gave her the truth about her father, and for the quiet moments they had shared in the dark. Deep down, she knew she just could not bear the thought of him being erased from the world. It was not about duty, it was something deeper, a bond forged in the wreckage of their lives. She met his gaze with steady green eyes, closing the book on their debts once and for all. What is it you want? Gabriel asked, his voice falling into a low, hypnotic velvet, while his eyes remained fixed on her with a predatory intensity. Grace sat in the quiet, her mind drifting back through 8 long years of loneliness. She remembered the 6 years spent tending to her dying mother, the slow fade of the only person she had left. She had been a slave to bills and debt, drifting through life without a single hand to hold. Loneliness was all she knew. I do not want to be alone anymore, she whispered, the truth cutting through the air. For 8 years she had existed in a void. She had buried her parents and survived Derek's cruelty entirely on her own. She was just so tired of being alone. She looked at him, her eyes shimmering with the weight of her grief. I do not need you to owe me, she said quietly. I just need the silence to stop. Gabriel watched her, his dark pupils expanding as something deep inside his psyche finally shifted. He reached out, his hand closing over hers in a grip that was as much a cage as it was a sanctuary. You will not be alone, he promised, his voice cold and steady like a blood oath. Not ever again. Grace felt the heat of his skin, a grounding force in her chaotic world. There were no grand gestures or hollow words of love, just a silent, unbreakable contract signed in the pressure of their joined hands. Outside, the sun began to sink, bleeding a violent orange across the horizon. The dying light flooded the sterile room, painting them both in a warm, cinematic glow. Grace turned to Gabriel, and for the first time, the hollow ache in her chest felt like it was finally closing. The old shadows of despair were retreating. 3 months later, Grace stood before a mirror in a sleek, high-security penthouse. The wound in her side had closed, leaving a silver mark against her skin. She did not hate the scar. To her, it was a badge of her own will, a jagged line of history that proved she had finally taken control of her own fate. Her healing went much deeper than skin and bone. 3 months in Gabriel's fortress, shielded by his shadow, had finally silenced the echoes of her long isolation. The shivering girl from the break room was gone, replaced by someone much steadier. The change was written on both of them. A week after she left the hospital, Gabriel handed her a stack of papers. Her debt, $127,000, was gone. When she tried to push it back, his eyes remained cool and calculating. He told her it was not a gift. He framed the money as a back payment, a loyalty fund built by her father over decades of service to the empire. He gave my family 20 years, Gabriel said softly. This is just a late payment. Grace could not argue with that logic, though she knew no amount of money could ever truly pay for a human life. With the crushing weight of debt finally gone, she went back to finish her degree. No more dead-end shifts or counting pennies for bread. She finally had the breathing room to build a real future. While Grace studied, Gabriel kept his iron grip on the city, as feared as ever by those in the dark. But his inner circle noticed something different. On the outside, he was still ice and steel, but deep within, the gears were being rebuilt. Marcus and Jake saw the cracks in the armor first. Gabriel was still the ruthless predator they feared, but the rhythm of his life had shifted. Mid-negotiation, he would glance at his phone, a ghost of a smile haunting his lips. His schedule now bowed to her, to the quiet ritual of their shared meals. Tonight, Grace stood on the balcony, watching the Los Angeles skyline shimmer like fallen stars. The night air was biting, yet she felt a warmth, strange serenity she once thought was impossible. Behind her, the floorboards groaned under a familiar heavy tread. She did not need to turn. Her heart knew the weight of his shadow before he even spoke. Feels. Gabriel stepped into the frame, his hand extending a glass of wine into the moonlight. They stood in that heavy, shared silence that only two survivors can truly understand. Grace finally broke the spell. Feels. Her voice a soft tremor as she asked what the future held for them. Gabriel looked at her with eyes that were suddenly dangerously transparent, admitting he had no map for this new territory. He left the choice in her hands. Feels. She replayed the last 90 days, the shared meals, the books he had given her, the hours of whispered truths. He had not guarded her like a prisoner, but like something precious. For the first time, she felt whole. Feels. I want to try, she said, her words chosen with the precision of a surgeon before a genuine smile lit her face. Gabriel watched her for a long beat, his own expression softening into a rare, jagged reflection of her warmth. Feels. They turned back to the city lights, their bodies maintaining a quiet, tethered contact. There were no grand declarations, just two traumatized people acknowledging their shared history of blood and grief. Feels. They were ready to step into a new chapter together. To the east, the darkness began to thin, signaling the arrival of the dawn. A rare sense of hope hung in the air. This proves a blood debt can be settled with Grace. Feels. Grace survived the loss of everything she loved without letting the darkness swallow her whole. Gabriel, raised in a world of wolves, managed to keep his loyalty to the man who spared him. Feels. The lesson here is simple. We are not built for the cold silence of isolation. We need the heat of another person to get through the nights when the shadows grow too long. If you find yourself lost in your own crisis, Feels. Remember that being alone is not a life sentence. Reaching out, building new bridges, and allowing yourself to be seen can be the single most important step in your survival. There is always a way back from the edge.